Welcome back to Blackberry Glen, and in today's video, in today's upload, I'm going to share with you 5 things that I think are important when it comes to deciding on the land that you want to purchase and actually executing that purchase. No particular order, and there may be some other things that are not on my list that you think are important, but these are the 5 things that I wanted to share with you today. The first I'll share with you is the use of a realtor. Not necessarily in finding the land, you may be able to find that on your own, but when it actually comes to executing the deal, I think it's an important thing to have someone who represents you in that transaction. Now, if you've done deals before without realtors and you're familiar with doing these things, then maybe you don't need it. But from the standpoint myself, this was the first time I purchased land that was not a home, and I felt it was important to have a realtor representing me. So that's one of my takeaways, is using a realtor. Number 2 is when it comes to actually finding the land, obviously you want locations important to you, but once you find the location, there's all types of land. There's land that has utilities near it. There's land that doesn't have utilities. There's raw land that, is out in the middle of nowhere. And then you also have land that is part of communities. Maybe it's a lot in an established community. We ended up buying a piece of land that is in an actual community, very small community of only 12 lots. But nonetheless, it was a community. And the reason we chose that is I didn't want to have to deal with bringing in utilities and all that type of thing. And speaking of utilities, that's number 3 on my list. When it comes to utilities, you obviously, if you are buying a piece of property that doesn't have utilities, you have to consider how you're going to get those there and the costs involved, etc. For us, we chose a lot that has utilities, and the utilities included electrical, obviously from the city. Water was important, and now obviously if there isn't water there, you're going to have to do a well. And also you need to consider that if you buy a piece of land, I come to learn, that doesn't have water service, you're going to have a challenge, I understand, getting insurance due to fire, not having actual city water nearby. So take that into consideration when it comes to actually choosing a lot and choosing a location, is your water supply. Number 3, of course, is you're going to have internet, whether you're going to need to, whether you'll have a wired connection that's available. We happen to have a great wired connection in where we're going to be, but there could also be a scenario where maybe you need to use the new Starlink as an example. And when it comes to your, other services like gas, are you using gas? Are you going to have a propane? Are you going to be on sewer or septic? And speaking of septic, the property we chose will end up being on septic. And so knowing that, a key thing I think is really important to do is prior to you putting an offer in the deal, like prior to actually even submitting an offer, I believe it's worthwhile for you to have a perk test done prior to even placing the offer. There's no sense of putting an offer on a land if it turns out the property won't support a septic system and what is required. And a perk test is basically done in order to determine the amount of how many rooms you can have in a property, and if the land is suitable for accepting a septic system. So that's one thing we did prior to putting an offer in the land. We had a person come out that does perk tests, and we had them do that to confirm that yes, we could put a septic system. So I would encourage you doing that even before an offer is made. I've heard unfortunate stories of people who purchased land assuming that it could perk and have a septic system, and it didn't, and they were stuck with the land. Or because the property already had a septic system on it, and then when they purchased the land, they needed to do an upgrade to it, and the perk wouldn't allow them to do a larger septic system, and they were stuck, with a 1-bedroom home as an example, because that's all it would perk for. So that's very, very important. The other thing you want to take into consideration is how far are the utilities away from the home you're going to be purchasing? Meaning, is the house going to be close to the street and the distance from the street to the utilities is short? Or is it going to be a long distance? For us, for example, our home's going to be set quite a ways back from the street, and you have to take that into consideration in the cost of bringing those utilities back to the home. That's also something to consider. So let's see here. I said gas or propane. If you're going to use propane, you don't have a gas line. That's something you have to take into consideration, whether you're going to have an underground propane tank or an above ground. But nonetheless, it's something to consider. So when it comes to utilities, you want to put some thought into that. And again, when it comes to the perk test, I suggest you do that prior to putting the offer in. And that I think is a valuable thing to do. Next, I'll say, is a survey of the property. So you actually have a survey company come out and survey the borders of the property, so that it's very clear as to where the property lines are. Now, that isn't necessarily something you need to do prior to making the purchase. It's something you should definitely do during your due diligence while you're going through escrow. So prior to closing escrow on the property, it's recommended you have a company come out and actually stake the corners of the property. And if the corners are far enough away from each other where you can't see one from the other, or there's a lot of trees, it's a good idea to have stakes put in along the property line, so from one property stake you could see the next one and you could follow it, especially if it's a larger piece of property and there's no other homes around, or something of that nature. That makes a natural indication of what the property lines are. So that's something we recommend you do. And speaking of things to do prior to closing escrow, not only the property lines do you want to get done, you may need to get a topographic survey done of the property to get the sense of, are there hills and slopes and those types of things. That may not be something you have to do prior to closing, but it's certainly something you may do when you go to build, if you have a property with a lot of slope on it. Other things you want to consider while you're in escrow is you want to consider having done, if you need any soil testing done. Maybe you're concerned if there's been any trash or toxic waste on that property, anything of that nature. And again, these are things, if you're working with a realtor who has dealt with property sales, they should advise you on some of these things of what kind of tests you may want to have done in the area. I did not need to have those done, although I did speak with a company that does that type of testing to kind of pick their brain as to whether we should do any kind of testing of the soils. But nonetheless, depending on where you purchase, you may want to consider that. Another thing you want to think about when you are doing this is what's around your property. Are there potential future growth around the property? Is there anything that would cause unusual smells around the property? Maybe there's a hog farm nearby or a chicken farm nearby. Is there anything near the property that would be a loud source of noise, a freeway or a quarry where they do blasting, that type of thing? It's worthwhile doing that. And one of the things I found really valuable was using Google Maps to look at the property and then look all around the surrounding area. Are there power lines? Are there cell towers? Are there freeways? What's nearby? And then visit the property and, see whether or not, okay, I heard, there's something in the distance I think make sound. Do I hear it there? For example, at our property, it's called Blackberry Glen, right? So we're down in a little bit of a valley, and there's a street that goes up a major slope. In fact, I'm facing that street right now. And when you get to the very top of that hill, as soon as you go to the other side, there's freeway there that you could kind of hear from that side of this community. Whereas we are down in this little glen, we don't necessarily hear any of that freeway noise, but you could certainly see it on Google Maps. So I encourage you to use Google Maps in a way that will help you identify, are there things that could become noise or smell or that type of thing. It's worthwhile doing. All right, so to summarize, the 5 things I just went over are using a realtor potentially that has familiar with land deals. Number 2 is really consider utilities when it comes to what's available, as well as the distance of those utilities from the home. Having a perk test done if you're going to have septic prior to making that offer on the property, because again, you want to make sure that the septic system is available. So those are the top 3. Number 4 was having a property survey done, so you know the survey markers of where the property lines are. And then number 5, using Google Maps and other tools as well are available as well, just to verify there's not going to be sources of noise or smells or those things that you want to take into consideration. So I hope you found that helpful. If you found this kind of stuff valuable, click the subscribe button. I'm going to be sharing with you through our whole journey of building our home and much more during our stay here at Blackberry Glen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.